On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Marco Rossi nabs the first star of the week and a big boost to the Wild defense tonight against the Blues.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will celebrate Marco Rossi being named the first star of the week for last week in the NHL. We'll take a look at how he stacks up amongst the rest of the 2020 NHL draft class. We'll also talk about the quarter-century team for the Minnesota Wild, rosters being unveiled for every team throughout the league, and a big return defensively for the Minnesota Wild tonight. Jake Middleton is off LTIR. We'll talk about that and preview tonight's game against the St. Louis Blues. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021, and kind of had a feeling this might be the case, which is why today's episode is coming closer to puck drop because we got some official roster news that Jake Middleton is returning for tonight's game against the Blues. More on that in a bit. But let's start with some fun celebratory news for the Minnesota Wild as Marco Rossi was named the first star of the week for the Minnesota Wild. In the past 3 games, Rossi with 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 total points, and a huge reason as to why the Minnesota Wild have won 5 out of 6 since Kirill Kaprizov was put on the shelf. And some impressive company for Rossi. Troy Terry, the second star of the week, he had 4 goals and 2 assists, 6 total points in 4 games. And Darcy Kemper had 2 wins this past week with a shutout, a .5 goals against average, and a .985 save percentage. So some very impressive company for Marco Rossi. And this is just further validation of what we have seen for pretty much the entirety of the season for the Minnesota Wild, is that Rossi just continues to stack good performances together. He continues to climb the charts. He continues to become a more and more integral part of this lineup. And since Kirill went on the shelf in the 6 games, Marco Rossi has 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 total points. He leads the Minnesota Wild in all 3 categories. He's tied with Matt Zuccarello in goals, outright leads in assists, and points. So if you want to talk about somebody stepping in to take the lead when your most important player is on injured reserve, there is no better way to do it. Oh, and by the way, he's also winning 51% of his draws over the last 6 games, and that's a huge reason why the Wild have won 5 out of those 6 games. And if you want to talk about, where is Rossi at in his process, just look no further than the 2020 draft class. And the numbers for many of these guys, because they're quite a bit further ahead, obviously the points leader for this class is Timmy Stützle, who has 287 points. Lucas Raymond has 215. Then you get Seth Jarvis with 175. Anton Lindell has 138. Alexis Lafreniere has 170. Quentin Byfield over 100. Marco Rossi up to 78 points in 143 games. And this, I think, was always going to be the case for Rossi. Was once he got going, he has been pretty impressive, to say the least. The last, arguably, 2 full seasons. Now, he did have a little bit of a goal drought last year, but this year, second on the team in goals behind Kirill Kaprizov, second in points. He's just ascending. He's ascending before our very eyes. And I know some of these guys have a large lead. For instance, Marco Rossi's 143 games. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players in the first rounds, in the top half of the first round of that draft class that have more. If you go to the bottom half, you've got Caden Gooley, you've got Dawson Mercer, Braden Schneider, Igor Chenikov, Jake Neighbors. A lot of players from this 2020 draft class have seen some extensive time at the NHL level. But one big debate that probably has been something that I have started myself, or one of the few people that have discussed it at length, is taking a look at some of the young centers throughout the league that are paid in a similar fashion to what Marco Rossi will likely get. And the comp I always use is Matty Beniers, who just signed a 7 by... It was just over 7. It was a 7-year, like $50 million contract. And you look at Beniers' peripherals, and in 41 games this year, he's got 7 goals and 15 assists, 22 total points. Now, he is 22, and Marco Rossi's got basically double in all of those categories, with the exception of the assists. But I think, and I stand pretty firm in the fact that I think we're going to be looking at probably right around a 7 by 7 for his next deal. And he absolutely is going to be worth that type of investment because of what he's able to do. That, the only other player that is even remotely close to as adept as he is at getting to the net is Joel Eriksson Ek. Beyond that, he's the second best player in that department. He's 1 year older than Beniers, but the numbers are... he's got a sizable lead in the key departments in all those areas. And another, that you can compare to from his own draft class, who has really started to turn it up, is Quinton Byfield. Byfield has 9 goals and 11 assists so far this year. His contract extension was a 5-year, $31.25 million extension that he signed before this year, after his breakout campaign last year where he had 20 goals and 55 points. I think Rossi's going to do better than that. So it makes sense to just couple another 7 by 7 with the Boldy 7 by 7, with the Faber 7 by 7. Like, just keep the numbers neat and tidy and clean. And I think the biggest reason that Rossi continues to see success is that nobody is going to outwork him. Nobody on the other team is going to outwork him on any given night. They may have more talent and they may win in that aspect, but nobody is going to outwork Marco Rossi night to night. He's going to win that battle every single game. So big accolades to Marco Rossi and big congratulations to him for first star of the week, continuing to just climb that ladder very rapidly for this Minnesota Wild team. And he's poised to cash in big once the season is finished. We are going to talk about tonight's game against the St. Louis Blues. We'll do that in segment 3, but when we come back, the Minnesota Wild quarter century team was announced. We'll take a look at who made the cut for the first and second team, and we'll take a look at the snubs. That's on the way as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. The Minnesota Vikings open as 2.5-point favorites on the road against the Los Angeles Rams in the opening round of the playoffs next Monday. And I have a feeling they're going to bounce back pretty good after what happened to Detroit. So you could put $5 down on that. You could put $5 down on Justin Jefferson for an anytime touchdown. You name it, FanDuel has unlimited options for your betting. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We will have a post game for you tonight. It might be a little on the later side. I have about a 30-minute drive to my game tonight. So we'll see what time we get back, but we will have a post game tonight after the St. Louis Blues game. We'll have one for you on Thursday and still ironing out the schedule for the weekend. We'll probably do one of the two, but we'll let you know later in the week what the plan is for the weekend's coverage as well. So just looking at the quarter century team that was just announced for the Minnesota Wild, and obviously some notable names on it. But what I'm going to do for the YouTube audience is show you who was announced, and for the audio audience, of course, I will tell you as well. So what we're looking at for the first team is Marian Gaborik, Kirill Kaprizov, Mikko Koivu, Jonas Brodin, Jared Spurgeon, and Nicholas Backstrom. That's your first team for the NHL quarter century team for the Minnesota Wild. Your second team is Andrew Brunette, Joel Eriksson Ek, Zach Parise. On defense, it's Nick Schultz, Ryan Suter, and Devin Dubnyk. So those are your first and second team for the quarter century team for the Minnesota Wilds. Let's dive into this a little bit just to discuss. Obviously, Gaborik and Kaprizov. Obviously, those two are going to be on the first team. That's not even a debate. And honestly, Nicholas Backstrom, we've talked in some of the summer off-season episodes that we've done of this show. The everydayer is pretty familiar with the fact that Nicholas Backstrom's numbers were outstanding. Devin Dubnyk probably had the shorter peak. Nicholas Backstrom's numbers were statistically excellent for longer. So I don't have a problem with Backstrom being goalie one on this all-time Wild roster. I really don't have a problem with that at all. Now, if you want to go with if you're building a team from Minnesota Wild past and present to win you a game, who are you picking? Maybe that's a different story. But anytime you're honoring players in these types of scenarios, for me, it's all about players who were statistically good the longest. That's why I think you see Mikko Koivu on the first team instead of Joel Eriksson Ek. that would be another spot that you could probably flip the two. And if you want to do that, I really have no problem. Koivu gets the first team because of the length of time at which he was in the league. And his defensive numbers were good all throughout his career. Obviously, he wasn't a big points guy. He had a couple of seasons where he accumulated a bunch of goals and assists, but he wasn't a primary points type center. He was a defensive center and a face-off specialist. Eriksson Ek, I think, has more of the offensive upside between the two. So it's all about preference here. And on defense, I mean, I really think, because by the time their careers are done, they're going to be near the top of the leaderboards. I think Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon as the top defenseman. I think that's the right choice too. Those guys have been consistently excellent statistically throughout the course of their careers. A couple of the other names, like if you go to the second team, you've got Schultz and Suter. Obviously, where is Brent Burns? Well, again, I go to the fact that this is honoring long-time excellence for a franchise as opposed to like individual season type things. And Burns was just getting his career started with the Minnesota Wild when he was traded away because they weren't going to be able to re-sign him. So they moved on, and he obviously has become one of the best defensemen in the league currently, but he'll probably go down as one of the best offensive defensemen in league history. That's a gamble you take, but he was just getting his career started here. And so I don't really have a problem with him being left off the list. The question is going to be the forwards. I mean, Brunette, it was very, very good while he was here. Zach Parise was also very, very good. Obviously, statistically, had a ton of goals. He played a ton of years here. Suter did too. The one that is kind of a question for me is I would like to give a little accolades to Eric Stahl. I mean, he was always a fantastic player for this Minnesota Wild team. If you're going purely on longevity, Koivu played 1,000 games here. Spurgeon and Brodin are numbers 2 and 3 on the list. Nick Schultz is fourth on the list. Ryan Suter is fifth. Then Matt Dumba just under 600 games with the Wilds. But I don't think he bumps Schultz or Suter. Schultz was a great defensive defenseman. Suter obviously was more offensively inclined, but still very good defensively. I just don't know that Dumba bumps either of those two from the list. And for Brunette over, say, Pierre-Marc Bouchard, Brunette's got the edge on offense. Parise obviously had 400 points here, nearly 200 goals. I think those are two pretty solid lists. The only one that I really like, and he's not even close to the top of the list from a games perspective. He's not even remotely close. He only played 311 games here, but if you look at the points numbers, Stahl was ahead of quite a few players here. Quite a few. So, I don't know. But Stahl has always been a favorite of mine throughout the course of my watching the Minnesota Wild. Stahl was just came in. He was one of the few players that actually had like a 40-goal season. Just never happened for the Minnesota Wilds before that. So he obviously gets kind of a appreciation in my book for what he was able to do. So in the comments section, let me know what you think of the first and second quarter-century team for the Minnesota Wild. Again, Gaborik, Kaprizov, Koivu, Brodin, Spurgeon, Backstrom is your first team. Second team is Brunette, Eriksson, Parise, Schultz, Suter, and Dubnyk. Do you agree with both? What would your first and second team be? Let me know in the comments, and we'll talk about that in the postcast tonight. When we come back, we'll get you set for tonight's game against the St. Louis Blues, because guess what? The St. Louis Blues are operating at just right at 50% on the penalty kill over the last 5 games. We'll tell you where the Minnesota Wild are at with theirs, and we'll talk about Middleton's return to the lineup. That's all coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Yeah, that happened to me. I had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So I was on the job hunt for the last several months and had a few services that I signed up for to try to help expedite the process. But guess who forgot to switch them off? Guilty as charged. And Rocket Money helped get that money back in my pocket and not continuing to be sent to subscriptions that I didn't need anymore. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, we will have a post game for you tonight. Just keep an eye on YouTube. It may be right about at the time that we typically go. It might be a little later than that. Just keep an eye on YouTube. We'll get it up and running as soon as we can here tonight. Minnesota Wilds are in action this evening. And as Michael Russo notes, 10 minutes before the deadline for rosters to be locked in for tonight's game, the Minnesota Wild activated defenseman Jake Middleton from long-term injured reserve and reassigned forwards Travis Boyd and Brendan Gaunce and defenseman Carson Lambos to the Iowa Wild. Ladies and gentlemen, he's back. And for Middleton, it will be great to have him in the lineup, but let's give some props as well to the guy who stepped in and really helped mitigate the loss of Middleton as much as humanly possible. That, of course, being Declan Chisholm. Chisholm has been great over the last several weeks, and since Jake Middleton left on December 12th, he has helped the Wild just really kind of do what they have been expected to do with all these players out of the lineup, which is just to tread water. The Wilds went 6-6 in the 12 games that Jake Middleton did not play, and they gave up 38 goals in the 12 games. So that was 3.17 goals allowed per game. In the previous games that Jake Middleton played for the Minnesota Wild, they were a much better defensive unit. They allowed, in the 28 games that Middleton played before breaking his finger or whatever he did, The Wild allowed 67 total goals, 2.39 goals against per game. And they were 19-5-4 with him in the lineup before that game on the 12th. So it'll be nice to have Middleton back in the lineup, and it is another opportunity for the Minnesota Wild to beat a team that they should, because the St. Louis Blues are as mid as can be. But one key difference for the St. Louis Blues since the last time the Minnesota Wild played them, Jim Montgomery behind the bench. After he was let go by the Boston Bruins, the Blues wasted no time in snapping him up and installing him as the head coach, even though their coach at the time was doing fine. It's just a roster that has some pretty clear holes on it. And if you look at what these two teams have done in the last 5 games, Minnesota Wild are 4-1. They are +5 in the goals department, 16 goals for, 11 goals against. So just over 2 goals per game. The defense starting to get back on track nicely. 28.6% on the power play, 84.6% on the penalty kill, which is a delicious number over the course of the last 5 games. And the Wild are 8th in the league in that span in points. St. Louis is 14th. They are 3-2 in their last 5. They've scored 23 goals. They've allowed 16. So they're scoring a bunch. Their power play right at the same level as the Minnesota Wilds, 28.6. Their penalty kill, 50%. Flip a coin, and you probably have better odds of successfully killing a penalty than the St. Louis Blues do. And it's been a weird stretch for the Blues over the last 5 games. They played the Predators. They beat them 7-4. They lost to the Sabres 4-2. They beat Chicago 6-2. They beat the Senators 4-0. They lost to the Blue Jackets 6-4 on Saturday. And now they will take on the Minnesota Wild here tonight. And for this Blues team, you kind of know the usual suspects at this point. Jordan Kyrou leading in goals with 17. He's also leading in points with 34. Dylan Holloway having a great season with 14 goals in 41 games. But, not a ton in the way. There are plenty of goal scorers. Jake Neighbors has 10. Pavel Buchnevich has 8. Braden Shen 7. This is a team, too, that they acquired Cam Fowler to try to help mitigate some of the losses on defense. And he's got 4 goals in 11 games. So they're scoring a bunch of goals, but you know what the issue is with the St. Louis team. It's that their entire D-core is basically on the wrong end of 30. Their entire D-core, with the exception of Philip Broberg, 32, 33, 33, 31. Perunovich is 26. Suter's 39. It's a very exploitable defense. And the Wilds have had a tendency to get in Jordan Binnington's head a bit over the course of his career. He's coming off a shutout against the Ottawa Senators. Did not play on Saturday because that was the second night of a back-to-back. So it was Joel Hofer that got beat up by the Blue Jackets. But Binnington, it's just like the great Katy Perry song. You're hot or you're cold. You're yes and you're no. You're in, you're out. You're up, you're down. He is just all over the place this season once again. So it's an exploitable roster. Get to the front of the net. That is something that we have seen the Wild do more of over these last few games. Get to the net. Attack the net. Get to the front of the net. And this is another opportunity to pick up a divisional win against the Blues tonight. Philip Gustavsson's in net. And Gustavsson has not only beaten the Blues this year, he's scored against the Blues. Be fun if that happened again, but, That's a circumstance type situation you can't really plan for. The thing that I will finish the show by talking about is so you get Middleton back in, and I think what the line combinations will probably look like is I would imagine that Middleton will slot back in with Faber, and Brodin and Chisholm will slot in together. And then you probably got Bogosian and Merrill as your third pair. The numbers for Brodin and Chisholm, well, Chisholm really in anybody, to be honest, pretty darn good in terms of goals against per 60 minutes. Yeah, we got to filter out some of these lines that have barely played together. In terms of goals against per 60 minutes, Middleton and Faber are 12th amongst lines that have pairings that have played 130 minutes. Oh, that's offensive too. We got to go defense only. Middleton and Faber, 7th in the league with a minimum of 130 minutes played together, with 1.15 goals against per 60. Chisholm and Brodin, where did they go? Oh, boy. Well, maybe my point is not valid. Actually, it's probably because they haven't played that many minutes together. Let's just do this. 50 minutes together. And I just would like to find it. I know they were doing well together. But this makes for great radio. Well, I guess I should have looked at that before the show started, but I would imagine that's what the Wild do with their D pairings, because Middleton and Faber have been very good over the course of the season, and Chisholm, I think, has enough flexibility and enough top four ability to be able to slot in with Brodin, and you just go to work with that because Brodin's been playing great, and just let those combinations do the heavy lifting and try to come away with the win against the Blues here this evening. But that'll do it for today's episode. We appreciate everybody tuning in as always. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week, and we'll see you after the game tonight. Locked On Wild has you covered every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.